This article is about the passenger liner. For the film by James Cameron, see Titanic 1997 film. For other uses, see Titanic disambiguation. RMS Titanic was a British ocean liner that sank in the early hours of 15 April 1912 as a result of striking an iceberg on her maiden voyage from Southampton, England to New York City, United States. Of the estimated 2,224 passengers and crew aboard, approximately 1,500 died. Estimates vary, making the incident one of the deadliest peacetime sinkings of a single ship. Titanic, operated by White Star Line, carried some of the wealthiest people in the world, as well as hundreds of emigrants from the British Isles, Scandinavia, and elsewhere in Europe, who were seeking a new life in the United States and Canada. The disaster drew public attention, spurred major changes in maritime safety regulations, and inspired a lasting legacy in popular culture. It was the second time White Star Line had lost a ship on her maiden voyage, the first being RMS Taylor in 1854.
Titanic was the largest ship afloat upon entering service and the second of 3 Olympic-class ocean liners built for White Star Line. The ship was built by the Harland and Wolff Shipbuilding Company in Belfast. Thomas Andrews Jr., the chief naval architect of the shipyard, died in the disaster. Titanic was under the command of Captain Edward John Smith, who went down with the ship. J. Bruce Ismay, White Star Line's chairman, survived in a lifeboat. The first-class accommodations were designed to be the pinnacle of comfort and luxury. They included a gymnasium, swimming pool, smoking rooms, fine restaurants and cafes, a Victorian-style Turkish bath, and hundreds of opulent cabins. A high-powered radio-telegraph transmitter was available for passenger use. Titanic had advanced safety features, such as watertight compartments and remotely activated watertight doors, which contributed to the ship's reputation as unsinkable.
The first-class accommodations were designed to be the pinnacle of comfort and luxury. They included a gymnasium, swimming pool, smoking rooms, fine restaurants and cafes, a Victorian-style Turkish bath, and hundreds of opulent cabins. A high-powered radio-telegraph transmitter was available for passenger use. Titanic had advanced safety features, such as watertight compartments and remotely activated watertight doors, which contributed to the ship's reputation as unsinkable.
Titanic was equipped with 16 lifeboat davits, each capable of lowering 3 lifeboats, for a total capacity of 48 boats. Despite this capacity, the ship was scantily equipped with a total of only 20 lifeboats. 14 of these were regular lifeboats, 2 were cutter lifeboats, and 4 were collapsible and proved difficult to launch while the ship was sinking. Together, the lifeboats could hold 1,178 people, roughly half the number of passengers on board, and a third of the number of passengers the ship could have carried at full capacity, a number consistent with the maritime safety regulations of the era. The British Board of Trade's regulations required 14 lifeboats for a ship of 10,000 tons. Titanic carried 6 more than required, allowing 338 extra people room in lifeboats. When the ship sank, the lifeboats that had been lowered were only filled up to an average of 60%.
Background: the name Titanic derives from the Titans of Greek mythology. Built in Belfast, Ireland, in what was then the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, RMS Titanic was the second of the 3 Olympic-class ocean liners. The lead vessel was RMS Olympic, and the final ship in the class was HMHS Britannic. They were by far the largest vessels of the British shipping company White Star Line's fleet, which comprised 29 steamers and tenders in 1912. The 3 ships had their genesis in a discussion in mid-1907 between the White Star Line's chairman, J. Bruce Ismay, and the American financier J.P. Morgan, who controlled the White Star Line's parent corporation, the International Mercantile Marine Co.
White Star faced an increasing challenge from its main rivals, Cunard Line.
which, with the aid of the Admiralty, had recently launched the twin sister ships Lusitania and Mauretania, the fastest passenger ships then in service, and the German lines Hamburg America and Norddeutscher Lloyd. Ismay preferred to compete on size rather than speed, and proposed to commission a new class of liners larger than anything that had come before, which would be the last word in comfort and luxury. The new ships would have sufficient speed to maintain a weekly service with only 3 ships instead of the original 4. Olympic and Titanic would replace RMS Titanic of 1889, RMS Majestic of 1890, and RMS Adriatic of 1907. RMS Oceanic first departed from a new home port in June 1907, along with the Titanic, Majestic, and the new Adriatic on the Southampton, New York run.
The ships were constructed by the Belfast shipbuilder Harland and Wolff, which had a long-established relationship with the White Star Line dating back to 1867. Harland and Wolff were given a great deal of latitude in designing ships for the White Star Line. The usual approach was for Wilhelm Wolff to sketch a general concept, which Edward James Harland would turn into a ship design. Cost considerations were a relatively low priority, and Harland and Wolff were authorized to spend what it needed on the ships, plus a 5% profit margin. In the case of the Olympic-class ships, a cost of £3 million, approximately £370 million in 2023 for the first 2 ships was agreed, plus extras to contract and the usual 5% fee. Harland and Wolff put their leading designers to work designing Olympic-class vessels. The design was overseen by Lord Peary, a director of both Harland and Wolff and the White Star Line, naval architect Thomas Andrews, the managing director of Harland and Wolff's design department, Edward Wilding, Andrews's deputy and responsible for calculating the ship's design, stability, and trim, and Alexander Carlisle, the shipyard's chief draftsman and general manager. Carlisle's responsibilities included the decorations, equipment, and all general arrangements, including the implementation of an efficient lifeboat davit design. On 29 July 1908, Harland and Wolff presented the drawings to J. Bruce Ismay and other White Star Line executives. Ismay approved the design and signed 3 letters of agreement 2 days later, authorizing the start of construction. At this point, the first ship, which was later to become Olympic, had no name, but was referred to simply as number 400, as it was Harland and Wolff's 400th hull. Titanic was based on a revised version of the same design and was given the number 401.
Dimensions and layout. Titanic was 882 feet, 9 inches, or 269.06 meters long, with a maximum breadth of 92 feet 6 inches, or 28.19 meters. The ship's total height, measured from the base of the keel to the top of the bridge, was 104 feet, or 32 meters. Titanic measured 46,329 GRT and 21,831 NRT, and with a draft of 34 feet 7 inches, or 10.54 meters, and displaced 52,310 tons. All 3 of the Olympic-class ships had 10 decks, excluding the top of the officers' quarters. From top to bottom, the decks were the boat deck on which the lifeboats were housed. It was from here during the early hours of 15 April 1912 that Titanic's lifeboats were lowered into the North Atlantic. The bridge and wheelhouse were at the forward end, in front of the captain's and officers' quarters. The bridge stood 8 feet 2.4 meters above the deck, extending out to either side so that the ship could be controlled while docking. The wheelhouse stood within the bridge. The entrance to the first-class grand staircase and gymnasium was located midships along with the raised roof of the first-class lounge, while at the rear of the deck were the roof of the first-class smoke room and the second-class entrance. Just forward of the second-class entrance sat the kennels, where the first-class passengers' dogs would stay. The wood-covered deck was divided into 4 segregated promenades for officers,
first-class passengers, engineers, and second-class passengers, respectively. Lifeboats lined the side of the deck except in the first-class area, where there was a gap so that the view would not be spoiled. A deck, also called the promenade deck, extended along the entire 546 feet length of the superstructure. It was reserved exclusively for first-class passengers and contained first-class cabins, the first-class reading and writing room, lounge, smoke room, and palm court.
B deck, the bridge deck, was the top weight-bearing deck and the uppermost level of the hull. More first-class passenger accommodations were located here, with 6 palatial staterooms featuring their own private promenades. On Titanic, the a la carte restaurant and the Café Parisien provided luxury dining facilities to first-class passengers. Both were run by subcontracted chefs and their staff. All were lost in the disaster. The second-class smoking room and entrance hall were both located on this deck. The raised forecastle of the ship was forward of the bridge deck, accommodating number 1 hatch, the main hatch through to the cargo holds, numerous pieces of machinery, and the anchor housings. Aft of the bridge deck was the raised poop deck, 106 feet long, used as a promenade by third-class passengers. It was where many of Titanic's passengers and crew made their last stand as the ship sank. The forecastle and poop deck were separated from the bridge deck by well decks. C deck, the shelter deck, was the highest deck to run uninterrupted from stem to stern. It included both well decks. The aft one served as part of the third-class promenade. Crew cabins were housed below the forecastle, and third-class public rooms were housed below the poop deck. In between were the majority of first-class cabins and the second-class library. D deck, the saloon deck, was dominated by 3 public rooms, the first-class reception room, the first-class dining saloon, and the second-class dining saloon. The first and second-class galleys were also located on this deck. An open space was provided for third-class passengers. First, second, and third-class passengers had cabins on this deck, with berths for firemen located in the bow. It was the highest level reached by the ship's watertight bulkheads, though only by 8 of the 15 bulkheads.
E deck, the upper deck, was predominantly used for passenger accommodation for all 3 classes, plus berths for cooks, seamen, stewards, and trimmers. Along its length ran a long passageway nicknamed Scotland Road, in reference to a famous street in Liverpool. Scotland Road was used by third-class passengers and crew members. F deck, the middle deck, mainly accommodated second and third-class passengers and several departments of the crew. The third-class dining saloon was located here, as was the first-class bath complex, containing the swimming pool and the Turkish bath. G deck, the lower deck, had the lowest portholes, just above the waterline. The first-class squash court was located here along with the traveling post office, where letters and parcels were sorted ready for delivery when the ship docked. Food was also stored here. The deck was interrupted at several points by orlop or parcel decks over the boiler, engine, and turbine rooms. The orlop deck and the tank top below that, named because of the water tanks and ballast tanks stored in the ship's double bottom, were on the lowest level of the ship, below the waterline. The orlop decks were used as cargo spaces, while the tank top, the inner bottom of the ship's hull, provided the platform on which the ship's boilers, engines, turbines, and electrical generators were housed. This area of the ship was occupied by the engine and boiler rooms areas, which passengers would have been prohibited from seeing. They were connected with higher levels of the ship by 2 flights of stairs in the fireman's passage. Twin spiral stairways near the bow provided access up to D deck. Ladders in the boiler, turbine, and engine rooms provided access to higher decks in those compartments.
Features. Power. Titanic propulsion was supplied by 3 main engines, 2 reciprocating 4-cylinder triple-expansion steam engines, and 1 centrally placed low-pressure Parsons turbine, each driving a propeller. The 2 reciprocating engines had a combined output of 30,000 horsepower or 22,000 kilowatts.
The output of the steam turbine was 16,000 horsepower, or 12,000 kilowatts. The White Star Line had used the same combination of engines on an earlier liner, Laurentic, where it had been a great success. It provided a good combination of performance and speed. Reciprocating engines by themselves were not powerful enough to propel an Olympic-class liner at the desired speeds, while turbines were sufficiently powerful but caused uncomfortable vibrations, a problem that affected the all-turbine Cunard liners Lusitania and Mauritania. By combining reciprocating engines with the turbine, fuel usage could be reduced and motive power increased while using the same amount of steam.
The two reciprocating engines were each 63 feet long and weighed 720 tons, with their bed plates contributing a further 195 tons. They were powered by steam produced in 29 boilers, 24 of which were double-ended and 5 single-ended, which contained a total of 159 furnaces. The boilers were 15 feet, 9 inches in diameter and 20 feet long, each weighing 91.5 tons and capable of holding 48.5 tons of water. They were fueled by burning coal, 6,611 tons of which could be carried in Titanic's bunkers, with a further 1,092 tons in Hold 3. The furnaces required over 600 tons of coal a day to be shoveled into them by hand, requiring the services of 176 firemen working around the clock. 100 tons of ash a day had to be disposed of by ejecting it into the sea. The work was relentless, dirty, and dangerous, and although firemen were paid relatively well, there was a high suicide rate among those who worked in that capacity.
Exhaust steam leaving the reciprocating engines was fed into the turbine, which was situated aft. From there, it passed into a surface condenser to increase the efficiency of the turbine and so that the steam could be condensed back into water and reused. The engines were attached directly to long shafts which drove the propellers. There were 3, one for each engine. The outer or wing propellers were the largest, each carrying 3 blades of manganese-bronze alloy with a total diameter of 23.5 feet, or 7.2 meters. The middle propeller was slightly smaller at 17 feet, or 5.2 meters, in diameter and could be stopped but not reversed. Titanic's electrical plant was capable of producing more power than an average city power station of the time. Immediately aft of the turbine engine were 4 400-kilowatt steam-driven electric generators used to provide electrical power to the ship, plus 2 30-kilowatt auxiliary generators for emergency use. Their location in the stern of the ship meant they remained operational until the last few minutes before the ship sank. Titanic lacked a searchlight in accordance with the ban on the use of searchlights in the Merchant Navy.
Technology. Compartments and funnels. The interiors of the Olympic-class ships were subdivided into 16 primary compartments, divided by 15 bulkheads that extended above the waterline. The 11 vertically closing watertight doors on the orlop deck could be closed automatically via a switch on the bridge, by a lever next to the door itself, or by an automatic buoyancy mechanism that would activate in the event water reached 6 feet high in the compartment. There were also several other horizontally closing watertight doors along Scotland Road and various crew and third-class passenger spaces on the G, F, and E decks. These doors required a small key to be placed into a slot on the deck above. Once the key was turned, the watertight door would close. The ship's exposed decking was made of pine and teak, while interior ceilings were covered in painted granulated cork to combat condensation. Standing above the decks were 4 funnels, each painted in the White Star buff with black tops. Only 3 were functional. The aftmost one was a dummy, installed for aesthetic purposes and used for providing ventilation to the kitchen, as well as for the first and second class smoking rooms. 2 masts, each 155 feet, 47 meters, high, supported derricks for working cargo.
Rudder and steering engines. Titanic's rudder was 78 feet 8 inches, 23.98 meters high, and 15 feet 3 inches, 4.65 meters long, weighing over 100 tons. Its size was such that it required steering engines to move it. 2 steam-powered steering engines were installed, though only one was used at any given time, with the other one kept in reserve. They were connected to the short tiller through stiff springs to isolate the steering engines from any shocks in heavy seas or during fast changes of direction. As a last resort, the tiller could be moved by ropes connected to 2 steam capstans. The capstans were also used to raise and lower the ship's 5 anchors, 1 port, 1 starboard, 1 in the center line, and 2 kedging anchors. Water, ventilation, and heating. The ship was equipped with waterworks capable of heating and pumping water to all parts of the vessel via a complex network of pipes and valves. The main water supply was taken aboard while Titanic was in port, but in an emergency, the ship could also distill fresh water from seawater. However, this was not a straightforward process, as the distillation plant could quickly become clogged by salt deposits. A network of insulated ducts conveyed warm air around the ship with electric fans, and first-class cabins were fitted with additional electric heaters. The Sirocco fan, a centrifugal fan, was used after a deal with H&W took place with Davidson & Company, Sirocco Works.
Radio communications. Titanic's radio telegraph equipment, then known as wireless telegraphy, was leased to the White Star Line by the Marconi International Marine Communication Company, which also supplied 2 of its employees, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, as operators. The service maintained a 24-hour schedule, primarily sending and receiving passenger telegrams, or Marconigrams, but also handling navigation messages, including weather reports and ice warnings. The radio room was located on the boat deck, in the officers' quarters. A soundproofed, silent room next to the operating room housed loud equipment, including the transmitter and a motor generator used for producing alternating currents. The operators' living quarters were adjacent to the working office. The ship was equipped with a state-of-the-art 5-kilowatt rotary spark gap transmitter with the wireless telegraph call sign MGY, and communication was in Morse code. This transmitter was one of the earliest Marconi installations to use a rotary spark gap, which gave Titanic a distinctive musical tone that could be readily distinguished from other signals. The transmitter was one of the most powerful in the world and guaranteed to broadcast over a radius of 350 miles, or 304 nautical miles, or 563 kilometers. An elevated T antenna that spanned the length of the ship was used for transmitting and receiving. The normal operating frequency was 500 kilohertz, or 600-meter wavelength. However, the equipment could also operate on the short wavelength of 1,000 kilohertz, or 300-meter wavelength, that was employed by smaller vessels with shorter antennas.
Passenger facilities aboard Titanic aimed to meet the highest standards of luxury. According to Titanic's general arrangement plans, the ship could accommodate 833 first-class passengers, 614 in second class, and 1,006 in third class, for a total passenger capacity of 2,453. In addition, Titanic's capacity for crew members exceeded 900, as most documents of the original configuration have stated that the full carrying capacity for passengers and crew was approximately 3,547. The ship's interior design was a departure from that of other passenger liners, which had typically been decorated in the style of a manor house or an English country house.
Titanic was laid out in a much lighter style, similar to that of contemporary high-class hotels. The Ritz Hotel was a reference point, with first-class cabins finished in the Empire style. A variety of other decorative styles, ranging from the Renaissance to Louis XV, were used to decorate cabins and public rooms in first- and second-class areas of the ship. The aim was to convey an impression that the passengers were in a floating hotel rather than a ship. As one passenger recalled, on entering the ship's interior, a passenger would at once lose the feeling that we are on board ship and seem instead to be entering the hall of some great house on shore. Cabins in first class also contained buttons that, when pressed, would signal for a steward to come to the cabin. Among the more novel features available to first-class passengers was a 7-foot-deep saltwater swimming pool, a gymnasium, a squash court, and a Victorian-style Turkish bath, which comprised a hot room, a warm room, a cooling room, and 2 shampooing or massage rooms. Complementing the Turkish bath and within the same area was a steam room and an electric bath. First-class common rooms were impressive in scope and lavishly decorated. They included a lounge in the style of the Palace of Versailles, an enormous reception room, a men's smoking room, and a reading and writing room. There was an a la carte restaurant in the style of the Ritz Hotel, which was run as a concession by the famous Italian restaurateur Gaspare Gatti. A café parisien decorated in the style of a French pavement café, complete with ivy-covered trellises and wicker furniture, was run as an annex to the restaurant. For an extra cost, first-class passengers could enjoy the finest French haute cuisine in the most luxurious of surroundings. There was also a veranda cafe where tea and light refreshments were served that offered grand views of the ocean. At 114 feet by 92 feet wide, the dining saloon on D deck, designed by Charles Fitzroy Dall, was the largest room afloat and could seat almost 600 passengers at a time.
The forward first-class grand staircase of Titanic's sister ship RMS Olympic. Titanic's staircase will have looked nearly identical. No known photos of Titanic's staircase exist.
The gymnasium on the boat deck, which was equipped with the latest exercise machines.
The a la carte restaurant on B deck, pictured here on sister ship RMS Olympic, run as a concession by Italian-born chef Gaspare Gatti.
The first-class lounge of RMS Olympic, Titanic's sister ship. The first-class Turkish baths, located along the starboard side of F deck.
Third class, commonly referred to as steerage, accommodations aboard Titanic were not as luxurious as first or second class, but were better than on many other ships of the time, where third-class accommodations consisted of little more than open dormitories in which hundreds of people were confined, often without adequate food or toilet facilities. The White Star Line had long since broken that mold. As seen aboard Titanic, all White Star Line passenger ships divided their third-class accommodations into 2 sections, always at opposite ends of the vessel from one another. The established arrangement was that single men were quartered in the forward areas, while single women, married couples, and families were quartered aft. In addition, while other ships provided only open-berth sleeping arrangements, White Star Line vessels provided their third-class passengers with private, small but comfortable cabins capable of accommodating 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10 passengers. Third-class accommodations also included their own dining rooms, as well as public gathering areas including adequate open deck space. This was supplemented by the addition of a smoking room for men and a general room on C deck which women could use for reading and writing.
Leisure facilities were provided for all 3 classes to pass the time, as well as making use of the indoor amenities such as the library, smoking rooms, and gymnasium. It was also customary for passengers to socialize on the open deck, promenading or relaxing in hired deck chairs or wooden benches. A passenger list was published before the sailing to inform the public which members of the great and good were on board, and it was not uncommon for ambitious mothers to use the list to identify rich bachelors to whom they could introduce their marriageable daughters during the voyage. One of Titanic's most distinctive features was the first-class staircase, known as the Grand Staircase or Grand Stairway. Built of solid English oak with a sweeping curve, the staircase descended through 7 decks of the ship between the boat deck to E deck, before terminating in a simplified single flight on F deck. It was capped with a dome of wrought iron and glass that admitted natural light to the stairwell. Each landing off the staircase gave access to ornate entrance halls paneled in the William and Mary style and lit by ormolu and crystal light fixtures.
At the uppermost landing was a large carved wooden panel containing a clock, with figures of honor and glory crowning time, flanking the clock face. The grand staircase was destroyed during the sinking and is now just a void in the ship which modern explorers have used to access the lower decks. During the filming of James Cameron's Titanic in 1997, his replica of the grand staircase was ripped from its foundations by the force of the inrushing water on the set. It has been suggested that during the real event, the entire grand staircase was ejected upwards through the dome.